Hello everybody, this is Jerry. Welcome back for another video. Today we're going to talk about the 2017 Suzuki GSXR-1000R, and we're going to specifically show you how to use the rear stand on those spools we installed in the last video. We're also going to remove the rear wheel from the tire because I got a flat tire, so I'm going to go step by step and show you how to do that and what you need to be careful about when you actually remove the wheel from this bike. There's some careful considerations that need to be made, so stick with me because that's coming up next. Now, as it turns out, I got a nail in the tire, and that's exactly why I'm taking this rear wheel off, because I got to take it and have the tire changed on the wheel. Right, so as you can see in this frame right here, the rear stand is actually holding up the bike in the back there on the rear spools. Now I'm actually going to get out of the way so you can get a whole view of the bike on the stand because it looks really cool. Okay, there's some tools you're going to want before you start, and those tools include a breaker bar. Now this one happens to be a ratchet breaker bar, which means, yeah, it ratchets and it swivels, but they do make these breaker bars non-ratchet. The next thing you're going to need is a 36mm socket, because that's how big the axle nut is. You're also going to need an 8mm socket, which is what this little guy right here is, and I have a little ratchet, or you need an adapter if you need for a big ratchet. That's to take off the rear sensor, the traction control sensor, and actually it's a sensor that does quite a few things, but you're going to need that to take that bolt off that I showed. Okay, you need two other wrenches. This is a 10mm wrench. This is also for the rear axle, for the chain tensioner, and 12mm wrench also for the chain tensioner. Okay, so those are all the tools you're going to need to take off the rear axle. Now this is a really up close shot of what's going on here near the rear axle. As you can see, the bike is up on the spools, which we installed these in the last video, so check that out if you get a chance. Okay, right here is actually the bolt that keeps the tension on the rear axle pushed back. This is the axle. What we're going to do is, to remove this rear wheel, is we actually take this nut and loosen it and spins that way, okay? Once we have that, we take this whole bolt and we tighten it that way into the swing arm. That allows this entire block, which is holding the axle, to slide back and forth. We want to slide it this way so that we can get the chain off the sprocket. And I'll show you what we're going to do on the other side, which is very similar. Okay, so now we're on the other side of the motorcycle, and it's very similar. This right here is the rear axle itself, and this is the nut that holds it on. Now when we take this wheel off on this side, something I want to show you here is very important, is that this sensor is the rear wheel sensor. This helps aid the bike in traction control, and you'll notice right here is a nut. That nut has to come out, and then this whole little piece slides out towards me this way. That's very important when on the 2017 Suzuki GSXR-1000R, that you get down here below the axle and take this sensor out first. If you don't take this sensor out, then when you go to remove the rear wheel, you're actually going to have a high chance of damaging the sensor. So make sure you take this bolt out and take this sensor out and just wire tie it up somewhere. Okay, in this shot you can see that the rear sensor has been pulled out and it's actually sitting right there, okay? This little sensor is actually magnetic. And how do I know? I turned it over and watch how it sticks to the rotor. Now what you're going to notice here, if you pay attention really closely on the axle, there's actually some markings right here at the top, at the bottom. See these little markings here? Now make sure that you take note of that before you loosen the axle nut on the other side of the axle here, on the other side of the motorcycle. For me, this was about 5.5 to 6 notches. The reason why is when you go to put this all back on, you're going to want to pull the axle back to these exact markings. Okay, now in this scene, we're going to loosen the chain tensioner bolt. Now this is a 12mm and this is a 10. So first we take the 12mm and we're going to work this nut back towards the axle. A little bit of pressure, she loosens right up. From there I can just go by hand And I just work it all the way back to the head of the bolt. Then you take the 10mm wrench, put it on the head of the bolt, and just give it a couple turns. Usually by this time it's pretty loose. And just get it to the point to where I can get my hand on the bolt and just turn it by hand. And then I'm going to work the bolt all the way back into the swing arm. Okay, that's good enough. I already did the other side, so now we're done with both sides. And we're going to push the whole rear axle this way, okay? And that's going to allow us to loosen the chain and take it off. Okay, now at this point you can see that the rear axle's been moved all the way up to the front of the swing arm, and of course the chain is loose. So let me put some gloves on because there's a lot of chain lube, as you can see by the white color, on this chain, and I really don't feel like getting it on my hand because it's kind of sticky. So all I'm going to do is take the chain and move it over to the side. Okay. See if I can get it to be a little bit more this way. And there you go, the chain is actually off of the sprocket. Okay, so what we're looking at here is actually the bottom of the tire. Okay, and what I do is before I pull the rear axle out, I put a block of wood, in this case a couple little pieces of aluminum plate that I had here, because I want that rear wheel to be not under load when I try to push the axle out. That really helps, something I learned when I'm changing out the rear wheels, makes it very simple. Okay, so now you can see that everything is ready to take the axle out. And what I do is I use a rubber mallet. This way I don't damage any of the threads or the end of the axle, and I just tap on it with a rubber mallet. Okay, as you can see here, I've got the axle tapped out with the rubber mallet. I pushed it out from the other side. Really wasn't that hard, guys. You don't have to hit the axle that hard. It just slides right out to this point. So now that I have it at this point, I'm just going to pull the axle out, and what I showed you earlier with the wood blocks and some shims underneath the wheel, this should keep the wheel from falling down. Looking pretty good underneath there. Let's see if we can just pull this axle right out of there. And there you go, guys. That's how simple that was. It just came right out. Okay. This is the axle plate that centers the axle. Just keep them together. Now there's two of these, one for each side. So make sure you know which one goes on which side, because they may not be exactly the same. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that I got the brake caliper wired up. Okay, and I just have it wrapped around the exhaust system. Now what I want you to see here is that this little aluminum extrusion or machined groove that they have in the brake caliper fits, see if I can get a shot of it, right there, guys. Right in that groove right there on the swing arm. It goes that way inside that groove. Okay, so what you need to do is, once you've got your axle off, as you can see here, I have the rear wheel and the axle out, and it's just being held up by a 2x4 underneath it, right? Once you get to that position where the wheel and the brake caliper are separated, right? It's important that for this brake caliper that you slide it carefully out of that groove towards the camera, right? Because there's only so much slack in the brake line. It will come out, but just be gentle with it as you take the whole brake caliper and slide it out of that groove gently. Then wire tie it off to the side, and then now we can just roll the rear wheel right on out of there. Now once you have the rear wheel off, everything you need, or everything that should be evident, is in this picture right here, okay? Obviously this is the axle. This is the right tensioner block, axle block. This is the left tensioner axle block. And you'll see how I have it laid out, right? This is the right side, this is the left side, so when I go to put it back together, I know which goes where. This is, I'm going to call it an alignment spacer that actually goes on the right side of the wheel. And this, of course, would be the left alignment spacer that goes on the left side of the wheel. Okay? You can see the thickness of them. They're probably called something else, but that's what I'm calling them for now. This is the axle nut. And this is the washer that goes with that axle nut. So obviously it goes like that when you put it on. Okay. This bolt right here, this little bolt right here, is the rear wheel traction control sensor mounting bolt. So when you put the sensor back on, that's the bolt that you're going to use to mount it back on. So there's everything that you should have once you have your rear wheel off. Now these two spacers, sometimes they won't fall off the wheel, but just be aware that if you're rolling your wheel around, they could fall out. So I prefer just to take them off on the right side and left side, take them off the wheel and put them with the rest of the components here so I don't lose them. Okay, at this point we have the rear wheel removed from the motorcycle, and I'll take that into my local motorcycle shop and put that brand new Bridgestone on there. Now here we have the Battlax RS-10R. This is made by Bridgestone. This is the tire we're going to put back on that wheel because, as you already seen, I had a flat tire because of a nail. This is a great tire, straight from the manufacturer. They have this installed on the bike. Just make sure, like I said before, you bring the tire up to temperature with a little bit of riding, okay, before you drop that hammer down. So this is the tire that's going to go back on that wheel and replace the flat tire because of the nail. Bridgestone Battlax RS-10R. Now, the label says it's RS-10, but I actually confirmed on the side of the tire that it is the RS-10R. So I'm not sure if both the RS-10 and the RS-10R just get the same label, or maybe they just put the wrong label on. I bought this one on eBay, brand new, somewhere out of California, pretty good price. I got it for under 200 bucks. Just make sure, like I said before, that you bring this tire up to temperature before you put that hammer down. Okay, you can see here, guys, that I got back the wheel with the tire mounted from the local motorcycle shop. Looks great. All right, you can see that I have the wheel rolled back into the back of the bike. Right, the chain, I just put the chain over the sprocket, right? Sitting on there loosely. And of course on the bottom, I put my shims back in there. But once again, this machined part right here, okay, is going to slide back into right there. It's going to go into that groove right there. Okay, so you can see I got the axle started on this side. It's just in like a couple inches. And now I'm going to lift up the wheel. I usually put my hand somewhere approximately up in here and lift up the wheel a little bit and then gently push in the axle. Sometimes once you get it lined up really good, a little very soft taps with the rubber mallet can help out. Okay, so you can see here that the axle on the clutch side of the bike, or the sprocket side of the bike, is fully in all the way up to the swing arm. And of course the chain tensioner block and axle alignment block is fully engaged, and we haven't tightened up the chain obviously yet. As you can see there, it's sagging. I just confirmed by looking up underneath the chain guard that yet the chain is fully engaged with the sprocket. And here on the other side you can see same thing, the axles come all the way through to the other swing arm. Okay, so the wheel is pretty much put back on here. One of the things I wanted to show you is what's right here in the center of this frame is the traction control sensor, and I'm turning the wheel by hand, trying to keep this focus in a very tight area here. So make sure there's nothing inhibiting or blocking the sensor to pick up those holes going by. So I've got the axle nut back on. It's not torqued down all the way. I'm gonna do that last. I'm at 5.5 on this side, and I just checked and it's 5.5 on the other side. And I checked the chain tensioner and I did a visual inspection of the wheel itself to make sure it's centered in the middle of the bike, and it looks really good. Okay, the chain tension feels really good. So there's the little traction control sensor, and that little bolt there, that little black bolt right here, I just put a little bit of Loctite on there. Now the removable Loctite is okay. Make sure you put removable Loctite because this got to come back off from time to time, right? I do an actual visual check to make sure, yes, the tire is rotating, the wheel I should say is rotating well inside the brake pads. I don't hear any unusual sounds. And one thing I didn't mention before is when you take the brake caliper off, don't press in the brake pads and do not grab the brake handle at any time the wheel's off, because it'll squeeze the brake pads together, and good luck getting the rotor back in there. Okay, so I have the torque wrench here because I'm going to tighten down the axle nut. and you can see that I have on 70 pounds and 4.5. Okay, because that's the, you gotta remember that this Suzuki is made in Japan, so everything there is Newton meters. In America, the United States of America, that translates to 74.5 pounds, so 74.5 on the center line right there, right? Okay, so I have the torque wrench on the axle nut, and with these I usually make a clicking sound, so I'm just going to keep tightening until I get a click. There it is. You hear the click? So the torque wrench is telling me that we're at 74 pounds. Okay, so there you have it. We showed you how to take the rear wheel off the bike. A lot of careful considerations on this 2017 Suzuki GSXR-1000R. We showed you how to get the brake caliper out of the way, right, when you're taking the wheel off. Careful consideration of the traction control sensor, removing the axle nut and getting the axle out, and of course putting it all back together when we're done. Hey, listen guys, I hope you got something good out of this video. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, go ahead and do it right now below. Give me a thumbs up on this video, and we'll be coming back to you real soon with another video, because guess what's coming up next, guys? Launch control, baby. 3, 2, 1, launch. So stay tuned for that. That's coming up real soon.